Good morning.
Morning.
The creation story is one of those that it tells us two key things. The first is that all of creation flows from God. That God is at the center and the source of everything that we see around us. And for most people, they can see this and they can say, yep, okay, if you have faith, you can accept that God is the source. That I still remember Ian, sorry to single you out, but why not? During kindergarten, it was a kindergarten or grade one? Kindergarten. His teacher had poems about science, and she had a poem about the Big Bang. And she said, does anyone know what the Big Bang is? And all the other kindergarten kids were like, and Ian goes, I know. And she goes, you know? And he goes, yeah, it's when all of creation went boom, and it kind of flowed out. And she goes, but you're because she knew me because she had been at a wedding that I had done. She goes, but your dad's a minister. And Ian, without missing a beat, said, well, who do you think made it go boom?
You forgot a line.
What's that?
How was God part of this?
Oh, yeah, she said, how was God? And he said, who do you think made it go bang? All of creation comes from our God. The second thing, but this is the harder thing for us to sometimes hold on to, is that everything that God created, on that sixth day when he looked out, he said it was very good. And we have a harder time remembering that. We often forget that the base of all creation rests on a foundation of God and on goodness. That everywhere we look at its source, there is a core of the goodness and the grace and the beauty and the hand of God. We can kind of get that when we look around and we see the trees and the fields and the flowers that are coming up. And we see that, yeah, okay, I can understand that God is behind this. We have a harder time when we are swatting the black flies or the mosquitoes, and we're like, okay, God's behind this, and I'm sure it has a purpose. But underneath it all is the work of our loving and generous God, who has created all of this, which is good. But we have a hard time sometimes remembering that when we see all that is wrong around us, all the things that are broken, all the things that should be fixed and are not. We see the shortcomings in this creation and we despair. We lose hope because we see war, we see racism, we see sexism, we see cruelty for the sake of cruelty. We see the poor mistreated so the rich can get richer. We see the mistreatment of the vulnerable. We have all of these things in our world that's constantly reminding us that it's not the way it's supposed to be. We see the abuse of the planet. We see all the people are taking advantage of whatever they can, the world around them, creation and other people. I was telling this to the inmates because especially the long-time lifers, have a hard time understanding that we have two phones. I have two phones. I have my cell phone and I have my landline. We still have a landline in our house, but I never answer it because the only people that ever call me on the landline are Pam's mom. So I do answer when Pam's mom calls. Or someone who has told me that they are from Microsoft Windows and something isn't working on my computer and they're calling to help. Or the last one I got was, hi, I'm from Visa and there's a problem with your card. I'm like, well, that's very, very specific. So I don't answer it because I already assume that whoever is calling me, if it's not Pam's mother, is trying to take advantage of me. And there's a cynicism that builds as we look and we see the world. And it's hard not to see the damage that we have done to each other, to our planet. And the climate lately, like I am glad we're not in Europe right now because they are roasting. But I'm sure our time will come. And we look around and we see the brokenness, and it's easy to start to think that, you know what? What's the point? Like everything that we can do, there's going to be someone who's just going to overturn it. That the greed that is resting in the heart of humanity will just continue to ruin everything. Animals going extinct, land being torn up just simply for the sake of a few dollars, people being abused and mistreated so that rich can get richer. Now I've depressed myself.
Me too.
Yeah. So where do we see God in this? But God is still there, at the very core and the foundation. One of the things I sometimes hear is that people say, oh, this world is rotten to the core, but it can't be. Because at the core is God's creating hand. That there is a goodness at the beating in the center of our planet, beating in the center of our existence, of our universe, beating in the center of all the people here and in this world. And it is important for us as people of faith not to lose sight of that. Because if we lose sight of that, then how are we going to continue to try to make a difference? If we give up and simply say that the wrong side has won, that there's nothing we can do, that good is being trampled, then we are part of the problem, even if we think we're not. Because part of our calling, because we have been given dominion, and what have we done with it? Not great stuff. But that still means we are not allowed to give up our responsibility. That we still have a role to play, that we still make a difference. And so the small things and the large things we do matter. Because in them we continue to proclaim our hope and the goodness in this world and in this creation. All is not lost. There is still hope because we still work to build the good that is around us. Every once in a while, I can feel kind of down. And then the other day, I was driving somewhere and I saw a bird just float through the air. And suddenly, I was okay because that bird was beautiful. Yesterday, I was at an event with an inmate in Halifax. And I ran into an old inmate there that I had known when I first started in Spring Hill and then briefly. So this is 7 years ago. And he was there, and it was really good to see him. And today, he's getting baptized. The amazing thing about this inmate is that for a long time, a lot of people would not have been able to see anything good in him. He was probably one of the most feared inmates in the prison. At one point, he had taken hostages. He had, in his own words, he had anger issues, and still grapples with that to some extent. But I can tell you that while he was in prison, at the end, he brought more people to chapel than anyone else did. Because even as he struggled with his anger and his frustrations, his honesty and his vulnerability to try to be a person of faith attracted a lot of people that had not come to the chapel before. And he did specifically tell several people that he would choke them out if they did not come to the chapel. But one of those guys who, this was in Spring Hill, is now in Dorchester Minimum. And so he comes every once in a while. He goes, yeah, I'm not coming just because, so-and-so said he'd choke me out anymore. But you see in this person that everyone would have given up hope on. You see that he's actually has a great heart. And it was the love of his wife that kept him from going completely under and brought him to where he is now. And you realize we can't give up hope. Because there is something good at the root of all of this. I took a bus trip once to Ohio for an event. I may have shared this story before, but it came to me. I got onto the bus, and probably it came to me because of the horror I'm going through right now in my life. But every single person on the bus spoke French. I was the only non-French speaker on the bus. And I had thought I didn't want to go to this event anyways, and I tried to cancel, and I wasn't able to cancel. So I end up getting on this bus, and I sit there, and this was when I was living in Ottawa, and all I hear is French. And I sit in my seat, and my shoulders curl in, and one of the weird things that we often do is that when we feel less about ourselves, like there was a part of me that thought, I was hard on myself. I can't speak French. Everyone else can speak French. I'm stupid. But you turn that narrative in your mind to oh yeah, everyone's looking at me. Everyone's judging me. Everyone sees me and knows that I don't speak French. They're all talking about me in French. And you kind of start to feed this paranoid kind of, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm from Ottawa to Ohio. It's going to be a long, long bus trip. And I am not looking forward. And I'm not understanding anything. And we're getting close to the first stop, and I'm feeling this pit in my stomach grow and grow and grow. And the person gets up to make an announcement before our first stop, and quite naturally makes it in French, because most of the people there are from Quebec, and the few people that are from Ottawa are completely bilingual. So the person makes it in French. And I sit there and I'm like, great. He's either told us that we are going to just go and then have to be back on 10 minutes, or that we have half an hour, and I have no idea. I'm probably going to be stuck in the washroom when the bus rolls away, and well, at least I'll be with people that understand me, but I will be left behind. And I start to, so I kind of raise my hand, and he says something to me in French, and I said, I apologize. I'm a stupid English speaker, and I have not understood a word that you have said. Could you repeat it for me, please? And he looks at me, and then he says, because he had a kind of a mic, he goes, and for our stupid English speaker, and then he was, and everyone laughed, and I laughed. And after that, it was one of the best bus trips I've ever been on. Like, everyone made a point of coming to me, and when we go somewhere, they would always like, where's Gord? Where's Gord? We have to bring the stupid English person with us. Come on. And they tried to teach me words of French, and you can see that those stuck. But it turned out to be an incredibly wonderful experience, because these people that I thought would dismiss me, that judged me, that were looking down upon me, actually were so kind and caring. They went out of their ways to make sure, and every time an announcement was made, and he would make it in English, and then half the bus would come and tell it to me in English as well, just because that was their fun thing to do. And I was included, even though I was different. And the people around me were good, even though at first I did not see it. There is a goodness, no matter what others say, that is in each person around us, in this world and in this creation, and we have a responsibility to build that up. We are stewards, and we cannot let that go, even if it looks like no one else does. We have a calling to lean into the goodness that is our creation. We have been given a special role as those created in the very image of God to make this world better. Margaret was consoled by all of her friends and everyone who knew her when she was appointed to the Vision and the Vision program in the church. The Vision Committee had existed for years, and no one quite knew what the Vision Committee did. And there were 3 people that had been on that committee for over 8 years, and they had never left that committee. And every time they would get someone new to come in, and that person would be chewed up and spit out, and then they would get someone else new. And at certain points, the congregation had tried to vote the Vision Committee out, simply because it was so toxic. But the 3 people had kicked up such a fuss that that now the church just simply accepted in every year, because people only lasted a year, they would appoint someone new, throw them into the lion's den, and pray for their well-being after. And this year it was Margaret's turn. But everyone was kind of curious because Margaret was one of the most compassionate, caring people in the congregation. Margaret was just nice. Like, to her very core, she was nice. And so they were wondering what these group of three would do to Margaret, because Margaret was able to build bridges wherever she went. She saw the goodness in people. And no one else saw the goodness in this vision committee, never mind the three people that were on it. And so they thought this would be like a non-stoppable object. You know what I mean? It was going to be a clash. And everyone was assuming that Margaret would get kind of chewed up. Sorry, Kellen. Everyone assumed that Margaret would be chewed up and spit out. But the amazing thing happened after their first meeting. And Margaret, right away, she had a way of knowing people. And she noticed Thomas, who was one of the members, had an incredible amount of grief. And one of the ways that he carried his grief, he would bring it to this vision committee, and he would just constantly lament everything that was wrong. And whereas the vision committee was supposed to look towards a future, all he would do was lament the brokenness in himself and in the world. And Margaret slowly started to pull that grief from him and to talk to him about it. And after 2 or 3 months, Thomas started to heal because someone listened to him. They didn't just say, oh, the world's not bad, and shut him down. They listened to his complaints, his fears, his worries, his brokenness. And Thomas started to get better. And the other person was Sheila, and Sheila just wanted to feel like she was contributing. So every time a new idea was presented, she wanted to kind of put her mark on it. So she was always changing and adding, which meant that nothing was ever finished because it always had to be changed by Sheila. But again, Margaret just saw that she wanted to know that she mattered. And Margaret started to spend time with Sheila and to help her to see her own value and her gift and her wisdom. And the last person in the group was Elizabeth. And Elizabeth just seemed to be, for lack of a better word, mean. She was always pointing out the shortcomings in everyone else. She was always pointing out the brokenness in the world. And the whole point of the Vision Committee was basically her chance to tell everyone that there was no hope, that there was no vision. And she held on to the Vision Committee to simply remind people, we have no future. And so Margaret started to talk with her, but there was nothing really to change in Elizabeth. She was just so angry, so mad, that no matter what Margaret did, in fact, the more Margaret did, the angrier Elizabeth got. At the end of the year, Thomas and Sheila had kind of come to a sense of peace, and when they voted, the congregation was actually able to close the Vision Committee down because Thomas and Sheila they said, we no longer need this committee. And the congregation was like, oh, St. Margaret had done it again. But Elizabeth would have none of it. And she argued and yelled, and finally, during the meeting, she turned on Margaret and started to say mean things about Margaret, at what point the chairperson stepped in and said, no, we're done. This committee is done. We're ending it. And everyone went after to Margaret to console her, and Margaret said, no, I'm fine. And they thought maybe Elizabeth would not come anymore to the church, and there were not a few people that were not unhappy at the idea that Elizabeth would just go away. But Elizabeth continued to come to the church. Not only that, she continued to seek Margaret out and to kind of pick and point and criticize everything there was about Margaret. And Margaret took it all in and smiled. In fact, Margaret, if Elizabeth didn't come to attack her, Margaret would go and say, how are you today, Elizabeth? And people would say, why would you do that? Why do you set yourself up? There is nothing to redeem in this woman. Margaret said, maybe not, but it's who I am. And I believe that there is something in Elizabeth too. And everyone else at that point knew that Margaret was suffering from some form of delusion, because there was nothing redeemable in Elizabeth. This went on for 10 years. And then Elizabeth passed away. At no point would anyone have said that Elizabeth had been moved or changed by the compassion or caring of Margaret. And she died as she had seemed to live, an angry, very bitter, hard woman. At her funeral that they held in the church, and there was not a great turnout, everyone was surprised to see that her brother came. They didn't know she had a brother. They knew nothing about her life. And her brother came, and they had the service, and at the end, her brother got up and said, I just want to thank you for the care you have given my sister. And he started to tell them about her life. They were brother and sister, and they had lost their parents at a young, right early teens. They'd both gone into the foster system. Elizabeth had been mistreated and abused in the foster system. She had got out. She was always incredibly smart. She had got a scholarship. She got married, and her husband had taken everything and left. She had had a child. She lost the child. As her brother talked, everyone just sat there with their mouth open, because it seemed that every single hardship that the world could throw at Elizabeth, it had. And she had had to fight her way for anything that the world would give her. She didn't get to finish school, but she was smart. She had worked her way up in her business. She had been hard because everyone had tried to shut her down, and she had had nothing but pain and anguish. And her brother then at the end said, but for the last 10 years, we talk once a month. And I understand, he said, that my sister can be a hard person to talk to, which is why I only did it once a month. But for the last 10 years, she's talked about how amazing this congregation is. How in spite of everything, you people have held on to hope and a sense of goodness in this world that she could not understand or see. And she mentioned to me, especially these last few years, how there was this wonderful person, Margaret, who meant so much to her, because she was the sign and the symbol of goodness that lays at the core of God's world. Margaret had no idea that Elizabeth had thought even one kind thought towards her. This world isn't fair. This world isn't working the way that we think the world should work if we were in charge. There is a brokenness and a pain and anguish and a loss. But there is a goodness in this world that comes from God. And at the core of every person, at the core of this world, at the core of creation, not only is it good, it is very good. And even if we can't see any difference that we are making a difference simply by striving to be part of that good, to be part of that very good. So this day in the spring, when it still seems too cold to plant, when we don't know what the future holds for us, when a world seems to be turning every crazy way that it can, we remain a people of hope. But not only hope that we hold in our hearts, but hope that guides and directs our actions, because we know that there is goodness at the core of it all.